Once people understand what they already have and what they can afford to risk, the pressure changes. The question becomes, which direction should I move in? This is where many people rush because narrowing options can feel like making a commitment. This episode isn't about choosing a path. It's about narrowing your focus without locking yourself into something you'll need to undo later. In the last episode, we focused on understanding risk and exposure. That clarity makes it possible to narrow options without rushing decisions. Today, we're actually talking about narrowing options, how to move forward without locking yourself in. Here's what we'll cover: why too many options create paralysis, direction versus commitment, reversible versus irreversible decisions, how to narrow without closing doors, and what this sets up next. Let's start with this: why this stage feels hard. Clarity creates momentum and pressure. What happens after risk awareness? After people understand risk, people tend to want to move forward. They want relief from uncertainty. They want to feel like progress is being made again. This is where many people rush. Once you become aware of what it is that you're looking at and you understand what you stand to lose and what you stand to gain, the natural reaction is to say, okay, well, I have to do something right now. I have to be able to address these things because honestly, once you're aware of it, it almost feels like you're obligated to do something right that moment. And yes, that is true. You should be able to think about taking action, but you also have to be very clear on what it is that you're doing and competent about what those consequences are going to look like. So it's not just about knowing the risk. It's about understanding how to be able to do something about those risks without compromising yourself in the short term and the long term. The real problem isn't lack of options. The real problem is too many directions, not enough clarity, pressure to decide, pressure to decide everything at once. Overwhelm is often mistaken for indecision. Here's what I want you to think about. Options are really just a matter of figuring out what the possibilities are. Here's what I'm thinking. Here's some of the things that I can do. It's not committing to something. It's saying these are the possibilities. And once you can identify what the possibilities are and you understand the risk of taking those possibilities or those options, then it opens you up to be able to do more with it and you can be more intentional. Why people rush to commit. Commitment feels like certainty. Certainty feels like safety, and safety feels like relief. But relief isn't the same as clarity. Saying that you did something, busy work, those are things that just are for perception, sometimes internally, but a lot of times externally. When you find yourself in a position where you're under pressure, the pressure is internal, but a lot of times it's also external as well. If you've got family, if you've got kids, if you've got bills, and people are asking you for answers that you don't feel comfortable trying to answer, or you're making promises that you don't know that you're going to be able to follow through on, then this is where people start to rush. This is where people start to try to commit to something because they have to tell someone something. So when you make that kind of commitment, it feels like certainty and certainly feels like safety, and safety feels like relief. But at the end of the day, is it really? Direction versus commitment. These are not the same thing. Direction is a decision. So let's look at direction versus commitment. Direction, narrowing focus, keeping your options open. It's adjustable. Commitment, commitment is closing doors. It's raising stakes. It's harder to undo. Commitment is putting your word to something and setting expectations of your ability to follow through on it. Direction is saying, Here's some of the things that I'm thinking about doing. Here are some of the options. Here are some of the possibilities. You're not telling someone that you've made a decision. You're saying, I've identified possibilities, and it allows you to be able to discuss it with them openly. Confusing these two creates unnecessary risk and consequences of your name, your word, your reputation all being put at risk and potentially being compromised. Why identity based decisions backfire? The identity trap. I guess I'm a consultant now. This is my only option. This is who I am now. Identity decisions make course correction even harder. The reason I say that identity based decisions backfire are people are making decisions based on where they're at and their current circumstances and situations, as opposed to their history and their potential of what things could look like once they address the problems, challenges, and struggles that they're facing. A momentary issue isn't something that you should base long term decisions on. The goal is to be able to remove obstacles that are in your way so that you can start to figure out what the next thing's going to be and what the next thing after that will be. Direction should reduce pressure. Here's the test of a good direction. Does this reduce pressure? Does this preserve flexibility? Does this protect what I know I can't afford to risk? If you can't say yes to these things, it's probably premature. It's probably you putting more pressure on yourself to make a decision and commit to something than trying to find out what's the path of least resistance. What's the best path forward? Reversible versus irreversible moves. Not all decisions carry the same weight. Reversible decisions. Exploring options quietly, talking to people, testing interest, and small experiments. These moves create information. And when you're in a situation where you're trying to figure out what your options are, you're in information gathering mode. And what you want to be able to do is you want to explore what your options are. These are potential pathways. These are potential things that I can do that could solve the problem or fix my current situation. So, situational awareness. You want to be able to understand and acknowledge this is my current situation. It's not my life, it's my current situation. You want to talk to people. Start gauging what perception is, what's going on out in the world. What are some of the things that are trending? What are some of the things that are potential opportunities or options that you can start to exercise? In our head, we may be only able to see a certain amount. But when we start to talk to other people, there's a couple of things that happen. One, we find out we're not the only person going through something like that. And that creates a sense of ease. It removes some of that extra pressure and anxiety to say, okay, well, if I'm not the only one going through it, then what are some of these other people doing to be able to address these situations? And you can start to find the things that overlap and say, okay, well, I can't do everything that they're doing, but I can do some of the things that they're doing. If they're a little further ahead of you and you start to see the results that they were able to accomplish, then it makes it easier for you to say, okay, well, if they can do it, then there's a good chance that I'd be able to do it. And again, that relieves that pressure and that anxiety that someone may have. It quiets the noise, both internally and externally. And that's where you start testing interest. You want to start listening and saying, okay, well, what are people doing? Is this something that I can do? Is this something that you would be able to help me with? And you start to do those smaller experiments that let you know, okay, this is something that I can do, or this is something that someone can support me with, or I don't have that level of support to go down that path, but I do have the options this way and this way. So direction is really about trying to find out what are your options and what's the path of least resistance and what's the path that's going to be able to get you the most support to help make sure that you're able to see it through. Irreversible decisions, quitting without a plan, burning bridges, large financial commitments, and public declarations too early. These moves remove options. Quitting without a plan. Sick and tired of being sick and tired. I couldn't. I just had to get out of that situation. That's a momentary decision that has long-term ramifications. Burning bridges. Sometimes you don't know that you're going to need someone later on down the line, and you can make a choice or a decision that can come back to bite you. It can come back to haunt you in ways that you're just not aware of. So burning bridges with someone that you could potentially need to support you or speak for you in rooms that you're not in, never a good idea. Large financial commitments. In some cases, if we're talking about someone that's unemployed or trying to figure out what their next move is, they may say, okay, well, I have enough money to look into starting my own career, my own business. And they will dive into doing something like that. Or they may say, you know what, I've got enough money set aside where I don't have to make a choice right now. And sometimes not making a decision and going with the status quo is a decision. And it's one that you have to weigh the options and say, is this something that I'm using to be able to buy myself time so I can get more clarity? Or is this something that I'm doing because I'm so overwhelmed that I have concerns about making a decision and it being a poor decision? There's nothing wrong with hesitancy, but are you turning your head because you don't want to look? Or are you turning your head so that you can see what the other opportunities are? You can see the full landscape and make a better choice. Why sequence matters. Information should come before commitment. Direction should come before identity. And testing should come before transition. You want to gather information and make sure that you understand what your options are, what you stand to lose, what you stand to gain, and who else it could affect before you commit. I say direction should come before identity is because once you understand what your options are, then we start to go into the realm of what perception is. Are you basing what you're doing based on the perception of other people or based on the perception of who you are in this moment or based on what the future may look like once you remove some of these obstacles? Each one is going to bring you to a different path. It's going to have you looking at yourself in a different kind of way. Testing should come before transition. You want to make sure that the path that you're going down is actually going to deliver the results that you intend for them to have. One of the things that I remind people is the best of intentions don't equal the best results. Sometimes you can mean well. Sometimes you think, okay, well, this was the path that seemed like it made the most sense. But you want to be able to make sure of that and that you have the buy-in, not just from yourself, but from the people around you that are supposed to support you during this new direction that you're going in. Because if you don't have that, then you may go down the path and find yourself abandoned. And then you're back in a position where you have to figure out what you're trying to do again. And the pressure is even higher at that point because now you've got something where you feel like you failed and it ratchets up the pressure even more to feel like you have to make your next decision or choice or move that much better and that much faster. How to narrow without locking in. Progress without pressure. Narrowing questions, not decisions. What direction feels lower risk right now? What builds on what I already have? What keeps my options open? Questions like these narrow without forcing answers. Think about it again. What directions feel lower risk right now? If I go in one of these directions, and it doesn't have to just be one, you're looking at options, you're looking at possibilities. So, what direction feels lower risk right now? And prioritize them based on what the results could potentially be. I can go down this path. Here's the advantages, here's the disadvantages, and here's the potential consequences if I go down this path. Here's another direction that I can go in. Here's the advantages, here's the possibilities, and here's the potential consequences. You start to look at not just the lowest risk, but what's the difference between risk and reward? If I go down this path, what could potentially happen? How much do I stand to gain? If what I stand to gain is more than what I stand to lose, then that may go up the list a little bit higher. The next question, what builds on what I already have? Are you trying to start something completely new? Start fresh? I just needed a change. If you move away from things that are familiar to you and things that are your natural abilities, then you're moving yourself into a realm where you still have a lot more that you have to figure out. But if you operate within the realm of things that you have somewhat of a clear understanding on, and it's just a matter of navigating things in a way that move you away from the things that weren't working for you and focusing more on the things that were, then that gives you a better chance of being able to be successful. And the other one is, what keeps my options open? Some decisions, some commitments will lock you into something and you won't have an option to be able to get back out of it for a certain amount of time. An example may be someone that takes a job and they took the job to be able to pay their bills, but once they're in that job, they know that they can't necessarily take a job for a month or two just to be able to buy themselves some time. And then when someone else pops up that's a potential employer, you want to go to them, but they're looking at you and saying, well, why would you take that job if you knew that it wasn't the job for you? It makes you look a little bit scatterbrained. It makes you seem flighty. And that can potentially compromise that new situation that you feel more comfortable with and the one that you really wanted. So this is where you want to be able to make sure that you're not just asking questions, you're also thinking about the consequences of if I go down this path. And as soon as I remove that obstacle, that challenge, struggle, whatever it may be, is the next thing that presents itself. Am I still going to be able to take advantage of that? Or is this something where, because of the decision I'm making right now, it'll no longer be an option? What narrowing looks like in practice: fewer options on the table, clearer short term focus, no public commitment, and less mental noise. And we can extend that even more so to say, not just mental noise as far as that internal voice in our head, but also the external, because there's the pressure that comes from friends, family, and all the people that care about us that want to see the best for us, in addition to the people that are just part of the peanut gallery and they're just on your case just to be on your case. So this is progress, even if it feels subtle. It's something where you have to be able to identify, if I go down this path, if I narrow down all the options, I want to narrow it down to something that makes sense, that understand the benefits, the potential pitfalls, and be able to not just explain it to myself so that I feel good about it, but to be able to explain it to other people as well. Well, when I started out, I thought there are no options, or there's so many options I don't even know what to do, to narrowing down to be able to say, well, I think these are the best options for me. Here's the short term and the long term benefits and the short term and long term consequences of going down this path. You don't have to make a public commitment to it. There's some people that as soon as they feel like they found something, they jump on LinkedIn or they start posting it online and thinking out loud. And the internet keeps receipts. So it's something where you don't want to make a public commitment to something, because if you don't stick with it, then again, it makes you look flighty and scatterbrained, where I can't tell how you commit to something and how valuable your word is, because if the people see you making commitments and making statements and you don't follow through on it, it gives them reason to question it, and it gives them reasons to question you. Common mistakes at this stage: treating narrowing like choosing, forcing certainty too early, and seeking validation instead of clarity. Pressure pushes people past this stage too fast. So, treating narrowing like choosing. When you're narrowing your options, you're not making a choice. You're just eliminating some of the poorer choices, some of the pathways that weren't going to fit what you needed to be able to do. They weren't meant for you. So, as an example, we're in an era of information overload. If you go on any social media platform or just in general, there are so many people that have an opinion, but it's not necessarily an educated opinion. And when I say educated, educated on what your surrounding circumstances are. It's something that's a best practice. It's a cookie cutter solution that's meant for more universal. It's a one size fits all. But your specific circumstances and situation require you to narrow down that universal principle into something that says, is this something that's meant for me? Is this something that's meant for people? And they have to figure out the other parts. So you have to get that additional context. And context is what allows you to be able to narrow things down without necessarily committing to it and making that actual choice. So treating Narrowing, like choosing, is a mistake. Let's look at forcing certainty too early. This is why you test things out. If we're talking about from the business side, sometimes people may have a great business idea, and before they go to market and they fully rush to be able to promote everything and drop their savings into it and a lot of extra effort, sometimes what they'll do is a beta test. And a beta test is something where you do a soft launch. You roll it out to a few people that you feel like these are going to be the people that I want as my ideal customers. And then you gather that feedback and you start to make sure that you've got a few different iterations of it, that you've gone through the process a few different times. And that going through the process is where I go back to the 4 C's: clarity, competence, confidence, and consistency. Once you go through a few different iterations, it gives you clarity on what you're looking at and who your audience is, what their feedback is. And that gives you the competency to be able to say, you know what? Yes, I know I can do this. These are the things that I need to change. These are the things that can stay the same. You can make the tweaks and anything that you need to be able to do to not only build up the confidence in yourself, but build up the confidence in the people that you want to be able to have as customers or clients. And then once you have that confidence, then it's about being consistent. Because once you know that you can consistently deliver, then you can have that conversation with anyone that aligns with what it is that you're actually trying to do. So, forcing certainty too early is something where you're making an assumption that you've figured everything out. And there's a lot of things that look good on paper, but the moment life intercedes, you haven't thought about the caveats and all the other ways that things could go. So, don't be certain, be confident, but also be competent enough to know that it's something that could go in a different way. And how am I prepared for if everything doesn't go exactly as planned? Seeking validation instead of clarity. I can't tell you how many times I will speak with an entrepreneur and they say, "Oh, you're a strategist. I'd love to be able to talk to you." And as we're having a conversation, what I realize part of the way through, sometimes earlier than later, is they weren't seeking advice, they weren't seeking recommendations. They were seeking someone saying, "Yes, you're right. You've got a great business model. You've got a great business idea." So they weren't there to listen, they weren't there to learn. They were there to hear someone say, "You're right." And seeking validation instead of clarity is something that is not going to help you in those situations. If you, clarity is hearing it from different people and getting perspective so that you can see the 360 degrees of it. So you can see it from angles that you may not be able to see on your own, and then making a choice and then making a decision based on having more context. But when you're just seeking out validation, you're not getting context. You're getting someone that's a yes man or a yes woman, someone that's just saying yes to whatever it is that you want. And if you're talking to someone that you're saying, well, I would like to be able to work with you, then they may just be saying yes just to get your money. But it doesn't mean that you're going to get the results that you're supposed to get. But at the end of the day, it's not going to be their fault. It's going to be your fault. And you're going to end up having to hold yourself accountable because that person's going to say, well, this is what you said you wanted. And because that's what you said you wanted, I followed your instructions instead of giving you guidelines. And those are two different things, and those are going to get you two different types of results. What comes next? Movement without overcommitment. Why testing comes next? Testing is the next step because direction needs feedback. Testing creates evidence, and evidence reduces fear. So, testing is how clarity becomes confidence and confidence. Once you understand what you're looking at, once you've gone through a few different iterations of it, then you have a clearer direction. Once you've gathered feedback, then you know that it's not just you thinking this is something that's going to be great. It's not just your friends and family that love you and want to be able to build you up. You're actually speaking and getting feedback from people that don't have a bias. There's someone that's giving you the feedback based on their experience and investment that they made. So the people that were having their own set of expectations, you want to be able to get feedback from them because they don't have any reason to lie to you in those situations. They don't have any reasons to embellish. What they're going to give you is they're going to give you the facts based on how they see it. And you take that feedback and you start to figure out which people are aligned with what you want to do and how you want things to go, because that's most likely going to be your ideal customer. If you get feedback from someone and you know that their feedback seems really, really off, then either there's something that you're missing and there's a blind spot, or that's not your ideal customer. And then that helps you narrow your focus on who you want to be able to work with and who you want to partner with and what path you should be on. Testing creates evidence. Once you test things out, then you have something to back it up. So when you're having a conversation, if you're doing a sales pitch and someone says, well, how do I know this is going to work? Well, you're not my first customer. I tested it out with 20 other people, and these were the results I was able to deliver. Now, I can't guarantee you your results, but what I can tell you is 20 other people were able to get these exact same results that I'm telling you that I believe I can deliver for you. That increases someone's level of confidence in your ability to be able to deliver on the results that you're saying that you can. And if you have testimonials, recommendations, customer success stories, case studies to back that up, then that just brings it up to a whole other level. And then there's evidence reduces fear. Once you have that evidence, then you're reducing fear, you're reducing doubt, you're giving people a reason to be able to believe beyond you just saying, I can do it. A lot of times we hear people say, well, this is how I'm able to do this is how I'm able to do that. People are going to promote themselves and put themselves in the best light. People that have been burned before, they don't want to hear that from you. They want to hear from the people that were customers and clients. They want to understand what the experience looks like from someone beyond the person trying to sell them something. So testing is how clarity becomes competence and confidence. Setting up episode 5. The next episode is safe testing. How to test ideas without burning bridges, how to learn without overcommitting, and how to gather signals without noise. The small moves, the low stakes, that's the real information. And that's information gathering that will allow you to be able to make bigger decisions with more clarity, competence, confidence, and allow you to be more consistent. Series continuation. What's coming after episode 5? Well, episode 5 is testing and validation. And then episode 6, we're actually talking about the transition timeline. What does it look like to actually move forward with the things that you want to be able to do? And how do you set out a timeline? How do you map things out in a way so that it's something that you can not only make sense to yourself, but to others when you try to explain it? There's no rushing and there's no forcing. There's just figuring it out and making each choice as you remove each obstacle. So everything that you're doing is being intentional and you're doing it with the same level of clarity, again, competence, confidence, and consistency needed to be able to make sure that you increase your chances of getting the results that you're setting out to be able to get. And then I'll leave you with this. You don't need to lock yourself into a path to make progress. Narrowing direction is enough for now. The next step is learning how to explore those directions in a safe way. If you found this helpful, like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time.